is our agenda for today. First, we'll be talking about what you need to prepare in order to create your T4s, like making sure your payroll categories are set to the right forms. We'll also be comparing the employee history summary journal with your employee year-to-date journal, just to make sure your pay dates and check dates match up. And we'll also be going through employee emails if you decide to email your T4s instead of printing them. Next, we'll be going through creating and editing your actual T4s, and afterwards we'll talk about making any historical pay card adjustments if you need to. This step is optional, so if you don't need to make any adjustments, you can skip this step. Then we'll talk about the summary page and if you need to edit any of those details. Finally, we'll be going through the printing and emailing of your T4s before sending those off to the CRA. And just so we're all aware, we'll be going through how to prepare and create T4s in this session, but you can also follow the same procedure for your T4As and RL1s. All right, so the latest version of Acclaim right now is 6.81. You want to make sure that you're up to date with this. It's going to be the January 2021 tax tables. If you have any version lower than this, you'll need to download the latest version from our customer portal. We have some help documents if you need to do that, and just make sure that we have the latest one. So let's go into our software, and you can see your version here at the bottom left-hand corner where it says 6.81 Acclaim, and then your tax tables are January 2021. Now, when we're creating our T4s, when we select our company in this company selection screen, just make sure your data year is set to 2020. And then we can log in and go ahead for that. Okay, so the first thing that we'll talk about are your form assignments. You can do that I'll show you in a little bit how to do that in the software, but we just want to make sure that your payroll category has the correct T4 mapping, and you can double check all of your payroll categories by printing the payroll category report. So let's see that here, setup, and then payroll categories. And for example, if we have, let's go into our earning payroll category here. On the bottom left side, you can see your form assignments, and for T4s, your salary payroll category is going to go into box 14 for employment income. The next thing you want to check are to compare your reports. So the first report that we want to take a look at is your employee history summary journal. Make sure that you look at this report based on the check date. The second report that we want to take a look at is your employee year-to-date journal. And we just want to double check that your pay dates all align and that all your amounts are okay. This is important because for COVID-19 boxes, it's going to be related to your pay dates. So when you're comparing these journals, just make sure the last pages of both of these reports match up. And if they don't, there might be a couple of things that contribute to this. So either for your employee history summary journal, maybe you included the period ending date instead of the check date. So just make sure that you have that checked off. The other thing is that there might be something wrong with our check dates, so we'll have to go back and change those or make the adjustments as needed. Okay, if you're going to be emailing your T4s instead of printing them, we'll want to make sure their email addresses are set up correctly in their profile. So I'll show you this in the software. So let's just make sure we're going to set up employees. You can select an employee, and then in the second tab here for miscellaneous, just make sure that they have this checked off, have an email address in this field, and a password to access those T4s. Okay, so that's about it for setting up to create your T4s. Let's actually go and create our T4s now. So the things that you'll need to know is the EI group. So perhaps you have two different EI rates, one for the standard and one for reduced rate. Just make sure you're selecting the right one. And if this is your first submission, then make sure your submission number is 1, or if you already submitted it before, to make sure that your submission number is correct. Let's go ahead and do that in Acclaim. Just go to Forms, T4, and create T4 records. And this is where we can select our correct EI group here and the submission number. This is my first time creating them, so I'm going to leave that as 1. Just click OK. It'll tell you how many slips were created. Next, we'll look at editing our T4s or our supplementaries. There are a couple of fields that I want to point out in just a little bit. So let's go into the software and take a look at our supplementaries. Just go into Forms, T4, and then Edit T4 Summary Supplementaries. Make sure that we're selecting the right EI group here. If you're selecting on one that you haven't already created, you won't have any information in here, so make sure this is correct. And then we can go and take a look at all of their information, make sure everything's okay. Now let's say I ran the T4s once and I want to amend them after. We can change the report type here. It's already set to O for originals, but you can amend them and change it to A if you need to. And when I create that file to upload to the CRA later, it's going to pick that amended T4 up based on this. A field that you might be interested in is in this tax info tab here. You can see the box 50 and 52 here. You can make the adjustments as you need to, and once everything looks good, we can just do that for all the other employees. Okay, so while we're here about editing our T4 supplementaries, I just want to take a look at the COVID boxes. Okay, so the new boxes are code 57, 58, 59, and 60. And according to the Employer's Guide to Filing Your T4 Slips and Summaries from the CRA, you can check that out in this link here. All employers are required to include the additional COVID-19 boxes in their T4s. The new boxes are going to be based on the pay or check date. Version 6.81 of Acclaim will automatically populate these boxes for you according to the pay or check date of the employee. The amounts reported in box 14 and code 71 go directly to these COVID-19 boxes. So for example, this example is given by the CRA. You can check that link here to see that. So if you are reporting employment income for the period of April 25th to May 8th, payable on May 14th, use code 58. So you can see here, code 58, May 10th to July 4th, because it's payable on May 14th, is going to fall under this box instead. Acclaim will automatically pick these boxes up to your pay and check date, so there's no additional things that you need to do when you're generating your T4s. Just make sure that this is what you're going to be doing. If you want to verify the information in these boxes, you just need to run the Employee History Summary Journal, like I talked about a little earlier. Just remember to look at this report based on the check date and not the pay period ending date. So because Acclaim will automatically add these additional COVID-19 boxes to your T4s, you won't need to add these in here in this additional box. So if you normally already have additional boxes, you might see a second T4 if you exceed the maximum 6 that you see here. So for example, let's say you normally have these 3 additional boxes, number 40, 32, and 33. Since there are an additional 4 COVID-19 boxes, 57 through 60, that means you have a total of 7 boxes to include. But since each T4 only allows 6, you're going to have those 6 extra boxes in your first T4, and then that 1 extra box in a second T4 for 2020. So if you have any questions about the COVID-19 boxes, just make sure you type those into the chat box addressed to organizers only, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. That's about it for COVID-19 for now, until we get to those questions. And this next section that we're going to talk about is optional, and will only be needed if you want to make adjustments to the employee's history. All right, so if you see something wrong in an employee's T4, you might want to adjust their history. You can do that by going to Setup Employees and then History, and then you can add a historical record. If you do that, just make sure that all of your net pay and amounts equal to 0 before you adjust. And if you do add one, just make sure you run integrity check by going to Utilities and then run the T4s again. So I'll show you that in the software here. So if you go into Setup, Employees, and then select one, and then go into the history, you can add a history record here. So your net pay equals to 0, and make sure all of these amounts also equal to 0. We can make this change directly in the T4 when we're editing the supplementaries, but some people like to do it for auditing purposes to have that history record before pulling the T4s. So you can do that here as well. And after we add that historical record, just make sure that we go into Utilities and then run that integrity check. The changes that you make to an employee's pay card or their history is not going to automatically pull through to their T4s. So if you do make an adjustment, you're going to have to run that T4 create option here again, and then it'll show that up in their supplementary. Okay. So the next step is to edit the T4 summary. So this just simply shows your information and your tax information. So you can double check that and make sure that that's accurate. And then there are also some other fields that are pre-populated and calculated, and you won't be able to adjust them. So I'll show you that in the software. Go into Edit T4 Summary here. Select the right RCT or EI group from here. Make the changes to employee information, certification, all that kind of stuff here. And then in tax info, your CPP, EI, employment income, all your boxes are here. You can make changes to your remittances if you need to, and then save. And that should be good to go. All right, so now is the time to print or email your T4s. So let's take a look at that. You can print your employer and employee copies, as well as the T4 summaries. And you can also take a look at some of the audit reports that you might see and make sure there aren't any discrepancies or anything like that. So let's go back into Acclaim, go to Forms, T4, and then Print. Oh, sorry, Edit T4 Summary. Yes, Print. Okay, so once we go into Print, we can make sure that we have the right EI group selected here. And depending on what you want to print, you can print a supplementary, summary, or an audit report. Make sure your submission number is the correct one. Select the first and last slip of your employees to be paid, and then select which copy or the instructions that you want to print. Typically, you'll be printing the recipient copy, so you can go ahead and select that. And then you can print a note for any additional amended or canceled slip, as well as the employer address on your T4s. For form type, if you have a blank sheet of paper, which is what I typically people would have, or if you have a pre-printed laser form, I'll show you both in just a little bit. You can select either one from here. So let's hit preview for blank paper and see what happens. So this is how your T4s will be printed on blank paper. Now, if we choose the pre-printed laser form, this is how it's going to look like. So all your boxes will already be on the paper before you print them, so you don't need to print those again. For summary, you can optionally print the payroll account number or the employer name and address. And then you can change also how it's aligned. So if you have any special paper that you have, it'll accommodate that just fine. For audit reports, we have a number of reports available. So for example, let's go into this EI premiums discrepancy report. So we have a difference of 1 cent. So we can make changes if we need to, but 1 cent should be okay. And we can see if anybody has a bad social insurance number in here. So nobody has, so great. That means all our T4s are okay with that. And that is all of your reports. You can print all of them if you need to. Next, we'll go through emailing. So, emailing your T4s. So this is why we set up our employees' email addresses a little earlier, and then we can send them as normal through e-delivery in Acclaim. So same place, T4s, and then print, and then recipient copies here. Now you can see the button for generate PDF appears. If you have anything else, it won't be able to generate that. So just make sure you have recipient copies selected here, and then we can generate that PDF. And it'll give you a little warning saying that it will only generate for the employees who have that little checkbox in their employee profile that we talked about a little earlier with their email addresses set up. You can click OK, and that's just going to go. And then that file is created successfully. So now we can go to e-delivery to send those emails out. So let's take a look there. We go to Utilities, e-delivery, and you should already have your email connections set up if you email your pay stubs. So we don't have to change anything there. But here, for select source of PDF files, just make sure you're selecting generated T4s here. Then we can click next, enter a subject, let's say T4s, a body, T4s, and then click next. So these are the only employees that have email addresses set up in their employee profile. If you think that you're missing an employee, go back and make sure that they have that checkbox for send payslips by email checked off, as well as an email address and a password. And if you do make that change at this point, you are going to have to rerun your T4s. So if you made a lot of changes, this is why we looked at their email addresses beforehand, before we even created our first T4. So we can just select that and then send those emails. And then they'll receive your T4s as a password protected PDF file. They'll enter that password in just like how they enter the password for their payslips, and they'll be able to see their T4s there. Okay, so last step, sending your T4s to the CRA. There are two sections that we want to focus on. The first is called the T619 Magnetic Media Transmittal. This is just to make sure that we're sending everything according to plan. And we'll talk about this in the software a little bit. This is just to make sure that you're sending your T4s on behalf of someone else, or maybe you're sending it by yourself or yourself. And then we'll actually go to create the whole XML file to upload to CRA. So in Forms, you can go there and then see this T619 Magnetic Media Transmittal. Just make sure that we have all these fields filled out. And for the report type, just make sure that we have the correct one. So because it's my first submission for T4, these are the originals, and I don't have any amended ones, so I can just leave it at that. Transmitter number, just leave the two M's here, that's fine. If you don't know your transmitter number, that's okay. You can just put 6 zeros or 6 nines, and that should be good to go. Transmitter type, this is what I was talking about if you're submitting these returns on your own behalf or by someone else. If you're a software vendor, you can select that here too. And then you can just fill out all the rest of this information and save, and we can go ahead and create that file. To do that, we can go into T4, Magnetic Media Filing for T4. Make sure that your right EI group here is selected. You can leave the rest of these by itself. We can just choose the correct path that we have here. This path is the place where you're going to download your XML file, and you can find that file there after we create it. Just make sure your submission number and then is the right one, and this will be your file name. We can hit create, and then you should have that file downloaded into that folder. Then you will go into this website here. You can do a Google search, find it on the Government of Canada website, type in Internet File Transfer. And I'll show you how that looks like. So here, it's going to look like this. You just read through all of this, click I agree at the bottom, and then you can enter your account number and web access code. If you don't have this information, you'll probably receive these in the mail if you haven't already. But if you don't have this information, you'll have to contact the CRA to make sure what your account number and web access login is. Once we log into that, we can upload the downloaded XML file from Acclaim. And that's about it. Pretty simple process, very straightforward. This is the end of our session, but you can always refer to our knowledge base here at helpdesk.paymatesoftware.com if you have any other issues, and there's also some helpful articles like how to reconcile your T4s with government remittance. But you can always also email our support team at support@paymatesoftware.com for any questions.